Hi, everybody. I hope you had fun watching the debate. Um, just to warn you, this is my living room. It looks like this all the time. We have a very large, loving dog who has discovered that when I am live online, he can attempt to jump in my lap, and I'm a captive audience. So you may see his head peek up. Um, it is also bedtime here in our home, and I am a mom. I'm very clear about that. My husband is upstairs tucking our kids in, but if there is some unexpected noise or run throughs, that's just the boys. A few of you have already joined. I suspect more are going to be coming online in just a minute. If you have questions, comments, concerns, if you would like more detail about anything that we talked about in the debate, or things that just got missed, go ahead and drop that in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have today. One of the things that I have a big problem with is Bruce Pelican was never particularly accessible as a representative, and Jared Golden, he ran on being accessible and he just hasn't been. We need representatives that are there and willing to talk to us about issues in an unscripted format, in a way that's understandable, in a way that's meaningful, and in a way that answers our questions. And sometimes the answer will be, I don't know, but the answer should always be available, even if it's a little bit later. So more folks are coming in. Go ahead and drop questions, comments, concerns in the chat. I'm happy to address them as they come in. Just so you know this format, I do town halls twice a week. I do them on Tuesday evenings at 7 o'clock, and then I do Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. I try to have a lot of options available so that you have a way to reach me in a way that works for your schedule. I also am available at events. I'm available on a lot of podcasts. I'm available on social media, but almost every week for the rest of the campaign season and going back several weeks, there are 2 of these events every single week available for you. Tonight's is an hour later so that we can accommodate the debate. So what would I have said on climate change? Oh my goodness, there is so much to say on climate change. I was a little disappointed that we didn't really dig into it until that question was posed over to Golden. It was kind of this elusive, hey, we want to talk about the bill. And then by the time it got to Golden, it was suddenly climate change. I find it very disappointing that both of the men were very, very excited about drilling. It came up multiple times. Why are we doing so much drilling? The amount of time it takes to open up new drill sites and to get production flowing from them, most of the time, it's not that short of a time period. It's actually a fairly lengthy time period a lot of the time to get those set up and going. My husband actually used to work in the oil industry, so I have a little bit of knowledge on that firsthand or secondhand. So we could spend those same resources instead of opening that up, those resources and time, we can actually take that and use that as a time frame and resources that we could spend getting more people off fossil fuels. Maine is going to need help with that. We are a state that doesn't have a lot of financial resources. We're a net recipient state. We have very, very old housing stock. Most people here can't afford a new vehicle. So it is going to take a lot to get us off of fossil fuels in Maine. And that's something that we're going to have to do. We know fossil fuels aren't sustainable. We know that in Maine, we have a place that in Sandy River Plantation, which is way out in northwestern Maine. And, I've had people several times just get an electric vehicle. It is not possible to get an electric vehicle in any sort of functional way out there because we just don't have the infrastructure. So we need to be building up infrastructure. We need to be making sure that we are taking the time that we have when we have a problem and converting as much as we can. And there's the dog joining us. He's a pretty good sport, huh? Yeah. So this is Gunnar. He is our pandemic pup. He's only ever been alive during the pandemic. So whenever he gets extra attention, he's very, very, very excited to join us. So we are going to be doing a bunch of conventional things. One of my opponents, Golden, is very excited about things like carbon capture technology, but carbon capture technology isn't a great solution. It's very expensive and it's not particularly effective, especially for the amount of dollars that go into it. It's touted by the fossil fuel industry as something that's greener, but that's like saying coal's cleaner. It's just not great for the environment. So we're going to have to do a lot of work to get off fossil fuels. We're going to have to do a lot of steps and changes, not just getting off fossil fuels, but also working on our resilience, working on adapting to the climate change that has already happened. I have a sister in Tampa right now. Not a great night to be in Tampa. We're going to be having more storms more frequently that are more damaging to property. So we need to be working on preparing in advance for that. We've really, really, really got to beef up FEMA and make them a lot more accountable. They've had some disasters over the years. We can't afford that, especially as catastrophes come closer together and are more severe. So we've got to do a little bit more planning. We've got to do adaptation. We may need to help people move out of areas that aren't really going to be as hospitable to life as they used to be. And that could be areas that are suffering really severe drought. That could be areas that are low lying and they are at high risk of flooding. So we've got a lot of pieces we have to do there. And then we're going to have some stuff probably that's a little bit more unconventional. We're going to have things like Maine does a great job of growing seaweed. And when seaweed is mixed into animal feed, it can really limit methane emissions. And when we do have methane emissions, there's tech that's being developed that can kind of come in for natural gas. So at least we don't have to be pulling out more natural gas to get us through this transition period. We could be using something that's already going out into the air. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. There's a lot of technologies that are exciting and upcoming that haven't been all the way tested yet. And those are going to have a lot more pressure on them as the climate continues to change. We need to be putting investments into science, and there are some perfect opportunities for Maine to be on the forefront of that and to create some wonderful, sustainable living wage jobs. The next question I had is really more of a comment. It's candidates that tell the truth. Yeah, we do need candidates that tell the truth. And I think a lot of the statements made by both Golden and Poliquin were not particularly upfront, or they were rehearsed snippets that really didn't answer the question. A lot of the answers were not responsive to the question asked. And that's not great. We're not getting the information we need to make a wise and judicious decision with our vote. And if your candidate isn't giving you that, maybe that's not the right candidate. A bunch more folks have come in. As folks come in, go ahead and drop any questions, comments, concerns you have in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. So the next one we have is from Max. Many rural small businesses are struggling. And I read this, it shows on the screen for you all, but it does not show it in the playback. So this is for the benefit of people who don't have time to watch this evening and want to watch later. Many rural small businesses are struggling. What would you do to help? Oh my goodness, there are so many ways that Congress can come in, mostly with grant and loan programs, but we can be tailoring them to the community. And I talked briefly at the debate about, we just got notice of a mill closure in Jay. We're probably going to have more mill closures. Paper is increasingly difficult to manufacture at home. It pollutes a lot. There are much less expensive ways to do it overseas. I worked in marketing and printing 20 years ago. And the industry has really changed. A lot of stuff is made overseas, is particularly the lower grade sheets. A lot of stuff go online, although that has not really reduced paperwork in offices for anybody who works in an office. But, if we start talking about, let's start with the mills, because they really anchor towns. And a lot of our smaller towns need an anchor. You can't have a small town survive on being a Dunkin' Donuts. You need something that provides living wage jobs. Otherwise, we're going to end up with our small towns just being wiped off the map, which is a tragedy that we can easily avoid. So if you are looking at a mill town, for example, I mentioned this in the debate, the boilers that are used for pulp really aren't that dissimilar than what you would use for, say, insulin production, which is something we should definitely have at home, and something that could not only provide living wage jobs, but could provide a service that we need in Maine and potentially save us a lot of money on Maine care. So there's a lot of wins in that calculation. And even though it doesn't use the exact same equipment, that we know that the facility already has the capacity to handle sort of that range and need of power. It's probably about the right size to manufacture that. And it's probably a fairly similar skill set. for that sort of industrial manufacturing. One of the other things that I mentioned is, we have several mills that are not working these days. Mills are sort of by their nature, they're on waterways. We could be using those for indoor agriculture. Maine is very blessed that we have a large community that's determined to give us food sovereignty, but that's hard in the winter months. Maine's winter months are hard. And though this is in District 1, in Westbrook, they're putting in sort of the first indoor vertical farm that's going to use a lot of hydroponics to provide fresh, wonderful local produce year round. There's no reason we couldn't be looking at some of our local mills for repurposing in that way. And again, creating living wage, sustainable, needed jobs that are resilient, and they're particularly resilient to a lot of the economic fluctuations we see in this global marketplace. So it may not just be insulin, and it may not just be indoor farming capacities, but that's the kind of thinking that we need to apply to keep these small towns working. And I think a lot of our green tech is going to be up and coming. A lot of it is going to be creative solutions. I trust rural Mainers to be incredibly creative and resourceful when it comes to making things stretch. I think that we've probably got a lot of these solutions at home that we have people dreaming up right now. So sort of the same question from Nick, how do I support job creation? Yeah, I'm a big fan of having, I think we should change our bankruptcy protections a little bit. They changed quite a few years ago to make it harder to declare bankruptcy. And what that does is it actually stifles innovation. So there's also a change in the tax code, that tax code that Bruce Poliquin is super duper excited and proud to talk about. That was really bad changes. There were a few needed changes in there. Most of the changes in there were awful. It did things like change how we have tax deductions on things like home equity loans. And that actually creates a lot of jobs and helps a lot of people who are seasonal in Maine make it through the winter. So I think that is a tax deduction that's probably a reasonable one to have. That's how, again, many seasonal businesses float. That's how many people start their own businesses, is through home equity loans. And I think there's a lot of fear mongering put out there by, oh my gosh, somebody could take a vacation and write off a few $1,000s based on that. And though there is a possibility of some of that happening in low ways, that's just not really how most people use the money. That's sort of like the abortion arguments. That's just not how most people do it. They're giving you a boogeyman that doesn't actually exist, so that you end up giving tax breaks to the wrong people instead of giving it to folks who are in the middle class and really wanting to start their own business and do that job creation. And we have so many of our businesses in Maine that are started by folks in the middle class just trying to make a living, particularly in our struggling towns. Taking away those tax breaks, taking away those tax breaks hurts. And if we were to go through and give those tax breaks, and we were to go through and look at our bankruptcy code again and say, you know what, we want a population that isn't irresponsible, but we also want somebody who takes risks. We want our population to be able to take risks on innovations. The way that our bankruptcy code worked is part of what helped us become the country we were, because people could do things like leverage their home to start a business that they were really passionate about. It's the middle class version of you see those articles like, how are you successful? And people who are wealthy, it's like, well, my dad gave me this low interest loan of, a few $1,000,000. And most people don't have a few $1,000,000 in equity, but a lot of people do start businesses on $10,000, $20,000 that they're able to take out of their home. And I think that will help people start their own businesses and help us create jobs locally. It's great to bring in large employers, but unfortunately, a lot of the large employers, really aren't interested in Maine, and B, the amount of tax incentives they are offered to go to places. I mean, we can almost just pay people to not do anything. So that's not really super helpful. I don't think that they're the ones needing subsidies. I would rather see, people who are trying to move up the economic ladder in Maine, whether they're coming from very humble beginnings. When I went to school, I had nothing. I often didn't know how I was going to pay for my housing the next month. And I would very much like people who are coming from nothing and coming from middle class to be able to have those opportunities. So I've got from Susan, Millinocket has been working on the old mill property and require a lot of brownfield grants, but they are becoming very creative in future uses. Yeah, I think that you have to relook at mills at a very different way. It was not shocking, but disappointing the way a lot of politicians reacted to the news of the J mill closure. I mean, not only did one of the boilers explode, so, when they're talking about preventable, like, okay, well, let's have a heart-to-heart with the boiler and make sure it doesn't explode next time. Things happen in running a business, but it was predictable. That mill used to employ thousands of people, and it doesn't. I mean, those jobs are leaving. So instead of waiting for the plants to close, instead of waiting for the mills to shut down, we need to be looking at, what their second, third, fourth, fifth life is going to look like before we even get there, so that we have plans in place. And if we get a mill closure, we're like, great, let's move on to the next thing. We're all ready to go. We've got our plan. So everyone talks about the immigration problem. At the same time, we have a worker shortage. Is there a way for these problems to merge and help solve each other? Path to citizen, guest worker. Yeah, our entire immigration code is just an utter mess. And we've got a few things that kind of tie together. So Jared Golden and Bruce Peliquin are very anti-immigration in a way that is sort of shocking to me, because immigration is really one of our strengths in the U.S., bringing together different perspectives and cultures. That has become one of our great strengths. I think that's why we have so much creativity in this country. I think that's why a lot of the time we end up on the forefront of innovation. And it's very disappointing to me that we've got this very nativist trend that not only is counterproductive, but it's kind of hypocritical. Like, my family came over here, not recently, it was several hundred years ago, but we did come over here. Almost everybody here, unless you are from indigenous lineage, I mean, your family came here too. So we do need to be really rethinking it. There are some jobs that, no matter how much they pay, people who are here don't want to do them. There are some business models that will never be able to pay well enough that people will want to do them as a full-time career. There are arguments to be made that they should have substantially greater worker rights, and I agree. Sometimes there are some positions that could use labor unions that don't have them, and I'm always supportive of folks who are interested in having a labor union, starting one. I don't think they necessarily need one thrust upon them, but if that's what workers are looking for, I think that it's fine for them to collectively bargain. It's the law and it should be upheld. But there is a trade-off. I mean, we have towns in Maine that do not have enough people in them for the town to survive. That's something that immigration can help on. We have towns that aren't that far away from, I don't know if you all see online sometimes, not just in the US, I've got this going in places in Italy, but in places in the US, they're like, we will pay you to move here to try to work. And I think that that's helpful sometimes, and sometimes it attracts higher wage workers. Sometimes it attracts lower wage workers. It depends on the jobs and the infrastructure. Our infrastructure in Maine needs a lot of help. We really need to get broadband everywhere. Rural areas here are really struggling staying on top of tech. But who and how that helps, it really varies. So Sandy River Plantation, where our property is, we are right next to Rangeley. And just in the past few years, Rangeley went from a place where somebody who worked at, Moose Alley Bowling, they had the ability to find housing there and live there off that job. Now they don't. I mean, bringing in people who imported salaries and people who purchased second, third, and fourth, fifth homes made it so people who are from there can't live there. So the problem with a lot of our problems is they're deeply intertwined. I think a lot of our answers to our worker shortage does come from places like immigration, but we have to be careful how we knit those together so we don't absolutely toast wages and labor rights. And we have to make sure that housing stays sustainable. And we have people right now that just want to pick at like little pieces and not see it how all these pieces work together and integrate. If you all watched the debate this evening, you would have seen me talk a little bit about how, student loans, there's something that we need to have some work on, or we're not going to have professionals in this area. So as a family law attorney, there are regularly people who need counselors that are on year or 2-year wait lists. I can't find counselors for children that are going through these transitions. It's a really important time for kids to have a counselor. And we can't have that in part because of the student loans. So all of these pieces fit together. And right now, instead of having people we send to DC that are thoughtful, that recognize that some of the simple problems are more complicated and some of the complicated problems are more simple and they all work together, and that you need to make decisions that work together. We have people that talk in sound bites and memes that they've gotten from polling data. And you saw that somewhat tonight in the debate, like when they veered off on immigration and they weren't talking about anything in substance. And it was pretty close to a racist rant you heard there. We don't have serious people doing these jobs. We don't have people that understand how the law works doing these jobs. The people who are voting on in Congress seldom actually do the reading and the work of the laws. It's done by lobbyists. It's done by interns, generally interns from fairly wealthy families because they can afford to live in Washington, D.C. for $30,000 or $40,000 a year. And we don't have a thoughtful process to address immigration. So, Steve, that is a very long and kind of elaborate answer to say, I absolutely think that immigration is a part of our worker shortage. I think it's a part of our technical skills. A lot of immigrants bring in skills that we don't have, and we can learn just as much from them as they can from us. And again, it makes us a more well-rounded, more whole society. We do need to be careful when we are using immigrants to fill a labor gap that we are doing so in a way that doesn't deteriorate worker conditions and doesn't harm the economy. And immigrants can come in at all different levels. We tend to have it in Maine because we've got a very tourism-based economy. We tend to have people come in on the lower end of that spectrum. But, on the West Coast, for example, the Seattle area had massive problems with costs of housing going up. We're bringing in a lot of tech workers that were suddenly working for not tech worker wages. So we do need to be careful how we address that, but I'm positive that that is a component of solving that problem. It came up earlier, I think, I can't remember if it was Bruce or Jared that was talking about, and they're not getting fair wages. I can tell you right now in construction, no matter how much you pay in Maine, there aren't enough construction workers for some of these jobs. At any wage, there isn't the technical skill available as somebody who's trying to build a house and would have loved to have already been in this house. There literally isn't the skill available. A lot of our population is aging out and retiring. Some of these jobs are, there's really an age limit to when you can do it because your body just doesn't work well. So, I think that immigrants do bring in a lot of stuff that we just don't have the way to support right now. We need to talk about mental health being thrown around. What do you plan to do about access to care? Well, I am deeply concerned with how we do mental health. And one of the things that I talked about, not this evening, but yesterday, I'd like to actually see us start addressing mental health earlier in life. At the debate that neither of the gentlemen showed up to. Very surprised, my surprise face. So, we were actually talking about that in the context of gun violence, that if we had pre-K come in a year or two earlier, you would catch more domestic violence, but you would also catch children that just have emotional regulation issues. And the earlier in life you learn the coping skills for that and how to address that, the better and more prepared you are to be a more well-rounded functional adult. So, we need to be starting from fairly young ages. There have been some studies out lately that say we need to be screening pretty much every adult right now for mental health and anxiety issues and depression issues, partially because we've neglected it as a society, partially because frankly, the pandemic changed us. I mean, it's a shared event we went through, and we're still going through it. We still have. I know we all really want the pandemic to be over, but for an awful lot of us, it isn't over. I mean, one of my children is medically vulnerable. We still mask out in public. There are a lot of people who are disabled or are chronically ill, and they're still really in the thick of the pandemic, either because they can't get vaccinated or they can't get the help that they need to stay safe for a variety of reasons, or because other people won't stay safe around them. So, mental health, I think, is a part of our physical health. I think our healthcare insurance should cover it much better. And I really do think we should be moving away from an insurance model, unfortunately. That's what people keep pushing, is the insurance model. But the insurance model has so many opportunities to hurt people, to cause harm, and to allow people who are a little callous in life to make a profit off the pain of others by denying people things they need. There's also a lot of pressure for fraud when you have low reimbursement rates. You end up with doctors that maybe they start out kind of like embezzlers do. Maybe you just were a little short for that candy bar a day, and then suddenly you're stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. It happens a lot of medical practice where the reimbursement rates are low, and they have to figure out ways to bill and charge so that they can make payroll. And that's one of the things I talk about. Is I say, I don't like the Medicare for All model, because I think it's got some major flaws. I think that we need to build a whole new model. And in that model, teeth should be a part of your body. How your brain works should be a part of that, your body. Whether or not you hear should be a part of your body. It is astonishing that we don't cover hearing aids for seniors. It helps keep people living independently longer, because they are able to keep their cognitive abilities together. There's a direct link between how well your brain ages and how well you keep your senses, particularly hearing. So it is astonishing to me that we've left off mental health. We've left off teeth. We've left off ears and eyeballs, and some of the most important tools that we have as a part of our bodies. So I think mental health starts at a young age. I think it starts by really addressing student loans and education. Right now, if you're a mental health care professional, unless you go all the way through to a master's degree, which is easily over $100,000 in debt if you aren't from a wealthy family, unless you're in over at least master's, if not doctorate, you're making near Burger King wages. You just can't work. So it requires a massive amount of schooling to address people's mental health and have those professionals available. And so it's going to take fixing education. It's going to take fixing student loans. It's going to take making sure that we have places for them to work. And it's going to take making sure that we have a system that people can work in comfortably at a livable wage and still want to do that job. So mental health is probably a 5 to 20 year fix. Unfortunately, I wish that we could get supports in there sooner. I would love to see more coverage available. But it's going to take a while, and politicians are not very upfront with telling you that, and they should be. So I hope that answered your question. So I'm going to skip down and then come back up. I have a bachelor's degree in work in mental health and make less than some at Walmart. Reimbursements rate suck. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The insurance issue needs addressing. Some don't cover enough, some not at all. Yeah, insurance doesn't cover anything. I mean, the insurance model is designed to cut pieces of profit off. It's designed to control cost, not by doing it in bulk, but by causing harm and saying we're not going to cover you. That's not helpful. That's not the system we need, and we pay enough to have it. It is astonishing for me to watch Republicans say we don't need it, and Democrats say, well, we need all this means testing, and the means testing means you can't use it. We have the money, we have the resources, we hire our government to make shared purchasing decisions on our behalf and to solve problems that are too big for us to solve at different levels. So they solve problems that are too big for us to solve as individuals, climate change. They also solve problems that are too big for us to solve at different governmental levels. You wouldn't want necessarily the federal government going and fixing every pothole, and you wouldn't want your town council, your town selectmen going out and deciding that they were going to do international policy. So we hire our government officials to do this, there's a few fundamental problems. But the biggest one is we don't hire people that give a crap about the job to do the job. We've made the job interview so unpalatable that people who would be good at this job won't apply, and we're left with charlatans and liars and ridiculous people that aren't even doing it for the job. They're doing it for money, attention, the side hustle, power. If you saw me on that debate stage tonight, you saw with your own eyeballs that I'm able to responsibly and concretely answer questions that I'm asked. I'm thoughtful, I'm knowledgeable, I'll tell you when I don't know something, and I really want to make sure our laws work together. And I was on stage with two unserious men who aren't like that. And I am the long shot. I should not be the long shot. I should not be the underdog. We should have people who are so much better than me running for this job, and it's just not a palatable process. So I'm going to skip back a little bit. Do you think there's a way to do away with filibuster? Maybe it should be modified. She laughed when Paula Quinn kept saying Democrats held all the power and good ideas get blocked. Filibuster isn't a House issue; it's a Senate issue. It needs reform. A lot of our things need reform. And the problem that we run into is everybody wants to uphold institutions until institutions hold them up. I think that we need to redo how we administrate a lot of our laws, and I think that we need to redo how we make them. And that means making some changes to Congress. Our Supreme Court, it's out of balance. I am truly an independent. I like a Supreme Court that's about a third liberal, about a third conservative, and a third kind of wild cards, because I like the interplay. I like watching the discussion and the sussing out and making sure we've really looked at a problem from all aspects. I loved reading opinions that both Scalia and RBG had weighed in on. I mean, watching the interplay between those two very opposed opinions, and they were actually friends, that gets better law, but that's not what we're doing in Congress right now. So that is really disappointing to me that we've let all of our systems get out of whack. And instead of having people in Congress to say, you know what, that's a better idea than my idea, or I like your point, and that is a weakness. Let's figure out how to make this problem not a problem anymore so that we can be helping more people. We just have people there for the bazinga and the gotchas and the memes, and it's exhausting. So I hope that we can fix that. I hope this race fixes that. I mean, even if we only go to DC for 2 years, and what we accomplish from this is the next time somebody says, well, you have to have millions of dollars to go to office, and no serious people would go down there, you can say, well, but there was that lady in Maine, and she didn't spend a whole lot of money, and she just really knew her shit and cared, and she got into office. That's what it should take to get into office. Let's see. Elizabeth, as a side note, Elizabeth, my sister's middle name is Elizabeth. She's a sister, and I was so mad at my mom that she gave my sister the middle name Elizabeth that I didn't talk to her for weeks because I wanted to be an Elizabeth. So I found out about you 30 minutes ago, and she stumbled across the last 15 minutes of the debate. My opponents have flooded TV with irritating ads, and if you lived in the district, you'd have my vote hands down. Elizabeth, you know what? If you'd like to help, there are a few ways that you can help that are easy peasy, and some of them are free. Gossip. So talk about it on social media. Tell friends, tell neighbors. It's free. It's easy. It's for a time-bound period. It's only through the election, so you don't have to annoy people after that. And when you're telling somebody about things you like, instead of just sending out obnoxious mailers and horrible commercials, I mean, just millions of dollars set on fire that could be helping people. You're not going to get very far, but talking about things that you like and things that you think are meaningful, people that you think are thoughtful, I think a lot of folks are very receptive to that. Free. Other things you can do. So I have folks writing up postcards. That's super helpful. If you want to donate some postcards, some stamps, sometimes writing it out. If you send me an email through the website or a message on Twitter, I'll get you names and addresses and a script. Sending out 5, 10, 50 of those, that really helps. There's about 540,000 voters in the district. I can't get to them all on my own. So every person helping doing a little bit of that is really helpful. Other things that you can do if you're in the district, I don't have lawn signs. They're bad for the planet. So I try to be really very committed to the environment. When I say that it's important to me, I mean it's important to me. I have window signs you can download, print them out. You can tape them in your car, your office, your home window. You can take pictures and share them on social media. Encourage other people to do the same. If you don't have a sign you like, I can make up a new one just for you, whatever you like. It's pretty easy as long as it's not too icky. No penises. I've had some requests. Politics is an interesting place to be. Also do Maine raising. And so if you thought, God, I would really love to do a door knock for you, but I'm in Michigan or I'm in York County and I don't ever get to the 2nd Congressional District. Buy anything online in the 2nd Congressional District, leave the seller a note, say, hey, I found you because Tiffany Bond didn't want my money. She asked me to invest in the community and make sure a small business was surviving, or asked me to help a teacher through Donors Choose. I keep those projects rotated through if you follow my social media. Or, next month, and you can do it early if you want, we're going to be calling up town halls and saying, hey, if you have a heating oil fund, I'd like to, contribute $5 or $50 or $100. I don't want anybody this winter to have to pick between being cold and hungry. I am shocked to watch the men have the solution be, oh, we could just drill, and as if that would even get to people by this winter. When they're sitting on millions of dollars that they could just solve the problem with, like that. If I had millions of dollars, I'd be solving our problems. So I hope that helps. If you'd like to get involved, Elizabeth, I'd love to have you. Feel free to contact me after. Let's see, I skipped around a little bit. I wish I had insurance. Maine Care needs upgrading on their income limits to match today's times. This was something that I've been talking about lately. Our social support network is awful. We have paid for it our whole life. And a social support network, not just the things we think of as welfare, like TANF, which it used to be known as like a welfare check, that's cash aid, temporary assistance to needy families, SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, housing assistance, childcare assistance. Those programs have a lot of federal funding that they come through, and they aren't tied to inflation. And it's appalling. And it's appalling to watch folks in Congress, think that they're just hot dogs, being able to say, oh, well, we cut out some fraud and, they can survive on $100 a month in food stamps. That's not what those programs are for. And that's one of the things that I alluded to tonight, but I actually talked about a little bit more depth yesterday. And I've actually talked about it at previous town halls. We have our agencies doing the wrong stuff. So if I have something horrible that happens to me, my husband passes away, I can't work, something awful goes awry, if my clients are separating out and they need, food stamps or housing assistance or something, I don't want the experience of somebody who's just experienced a horrible life event. These people, their relationships are crumbling. Somebody's died. Somebody's gotten disabled. Somebody's developed mental health issues. They need help. People who are disabled aren't allowed to work for a year before they can get benefits. Who thought that was a great idea? That's a horrible idea. If somebody becomes disabled, help them. Their life is already very hard. They don't need anything harder. And so we've got our DHHS in Maine, and it's different things in different states, but it's DHHS here. We've got our DHHS. They're both tasked with delivering services, but they're also tasked with enforcement and catching fraud. That's not what they're good at. We should make our social services reportable, not necessarily as income, but reportable in some way. A form gets issued to the IRS. And if somebody snuck through and they were naughty and they took benefits they shouldn't have gotten, let IRS catch it. They can catch it with a 10th of the effort at way less expense. And then we can have our social services use those resources to deliver better social services. And we can take our social services workers out of the emotional position where they're constantly having to treat their clients like criminals. It's awful. So I would love to see Matthew get health insurance. I'd actually love us off insurance entirely. I don't think that insurance is the right model. But until we have a better model, I would love to see us be taking the money that we spend chasing down fraud, which is often way more than we catch in fraud, move that to IRS. They're good at it. They're fast at it. It's much more efficient, and be able to redirect those resources to making sure that people actually get what they need for help. I don't think that we have a comprehensive enough system now. Let's see. More comments about people not having, a caseload issues. Anyone who works in Maine, minimum wage job is automatically over the limit, raised the limit. Absolutely. And you're welcome, Elizabeth. We've had a bunch more people come in. So for those of you who are new, I always make sure, if at all possible, I have all the time in the world for you. I don't think you'll want to stay up super late talking to me. I know that I am sort of pathologically boring and not particularly funny. But if you have questions, comments, or concerns, Tuesday nights and Saturday mornings, and tonight until you don't have any more questions for me, I am available in this open format. You can ask me questions. You can see if there's anything that you need more detail on, that you are unclear on. It's actually been a really lovely experience this year. We haven't had any trolls come in and try to ask snarky or inappropriate stuff in this particular medium, which has been great. I love having you. I'm happy to have these conversations. Maine is a huge state. It's very hard to get to everywhere. I've been sending out handwritten cards to folks in some of our most remote areas and our smallest towns. I was able to bring a little bit of attention to our northernmost resident who doesn't actually get mail service right now. That's a big problem. So I try to have this available. Just killing a few minutes now. If anybody else has questions, comments, concerns, if the debate was somehow not gratifying, if there were answers that you were looking for, we didn't even touch guns, probably because, both the men on the stage are very pew-pew with they want no restrictions apparently on weapons at all. I try to be very clear that I don't care if you hunt. My own children are getting into it. My 11-year-old went to hunter safety camp this summer, a sleepaway camp. And, I do not have an issue with people using weapons for self-defense. I do not have an issue with people hunting. That's how a lot of my clients actually feed their families, because we do have a lot of poverty in rural Maine. But if you come after people, if you try to hunt people, you should not have access to weapons. We have a real domestic violence problem here in Maine and across the country, but particularly in Maine, we have a pretty massive domestic violence problem, and we should be taking it more seriously. I talk a lot about, in the context of red flag laws, and we talked about mental health earlier. My father killed himself with a gun when I was a kid. It was horrifying, and red flag laws probably would have prevented that. I think we all know somebody in our lives who probably should not have weapons. We all have that cousin or brother or friend where, there's some people that shouldn't have guns. Some people shouldn't have guns ever. Some people shouldn't have guns during certain periods in their life, either because they're dealing with a mental health issue, or they've just got a crisis where it's not safe. Maybe they aren't at a point in their life where they make wise and judicious decisions with weaponry. And right now, that's something that people aren't willing to talk about in the 2nd Congressional District, but it's important. It is something that we need to address, because rates are kicking up, and it is a problem. So Heidi says she sent a message on Twitter, missed the debate, thought it was airing at 8, can't find it to watch. Do I have a link? I will be putting it up on Twitter as soon as I have it. I haven't checked because I've been here, but my understanding is fairly swiftly after it wrapped up, they were supposed to put it on News Center on their YouTube. And I think there might also be a replay on Facebook. And I think by tomorrow it is supposed to be on their website, but I'm not certain about that one. Arthur says, if elected, what will you do to ensure separation of church and state, a woman's right to choose, stop the rise of fascism? One of the things that really gets me is we have 2 gentlemen that I'm running against that won't even say the word fascism. Like, that's just astonishing to me. If you cannot acknowledge that fascism is a thing, you are completely ill prepared to deal with it, because part of what fascism, how it creeps, it's actually a lot like a narcissist in a divorce. The way fascism works is, they're kidding or they're joking or you're just taking it too seriously or you're not in on it, when they say things that are super offensive that land poorly, when they start calling people cockroaches and when they start telling you that, when they start othering people, when they start trying to get you into a space where they can divide you up, they usually start with pretty crummy humor. And then they move into a space where it escalates, and pretty soon everybody is so divided that there's massive human rights violations. And we've seen this happen around the world repeatedly. It's happening in several places in the world right now. We need to be very mindful of how it's happening now. And it is happening in our country. There are some fascist undertones, and we need to be able to address it. If you can't call it out when you see it happening, if you can't say, hey, this isn't a joke, this isn't acceptable, this is not behavior that we want, particularly in elected leaders or appointed leaders, just in leadership. This is not something that we want. We shouldn't be having purposefully cruel policies. We shouldn't be trying to make people's lives harmed. Policies. We shouldn't be trying to make people's lives harmed. But right now, Bruce Pelican and Jared Golden, they're both pretty cool with enabling fascism, and that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to treat people like they are silly or ridiculous when they are trying to stop other people from being hurt. That's not okay. The separation of church and state, I am a huge fan of separation of church and state. I sort of semi-infamously had a run-in with Cynthia Dill once upon a time where she kept trying to push me on, pushing what my religion was. And I just don't think religion and government belong in amongst each other. If you believe in a religion the way that I think you should believe in a religion, you really shouldn't be in a position where you can be pushing that upon others. And they really do need to be separated, because it's all fun and games until your religion isn't the one that prevails. So I do think we need a very secular government and a permissive government that lets people explore how they feel philosophically. I don't think that churches should be participating in a huge amount of government activities. I'm very disappointed to see how intertwined they've been becoming lately. Our country was purposefully set up separated so that you didn't have religious persecutions. And it's weird to see people pushing it. It's not acceptable. A woman's right to choose. For anyone who watched the debate this evening, I was actually getting on the gentleman about late-term abortion, and an abortion should never be prohibited. We should have federal protection for our right to privacy and our medical care. I don't know, shame on us, shame on politicians, but shame on us for letting this happen. We have somehow let politicians convince us that if we go around and get into our neighbor's business like busy little bees and get super judgy without having any idea what's really going on in their lives, and we decide that we're better or they need to have punishment or their lives are awful, that they can extract a huge amount of money from us so we can feel self-righteous. And that has really shown itself in abortion. So I get into this conversation. I got into it a lot when I was collecting signatures because I talked to thousands of people. And people are like, well, I'm not against late-term abortion. And I feel like anybody who says that doesn't know what late-term abortion is. So there aren't millions of women running around getting knocked up just so at like 8.5 months along, we can be like, oh, I've decided that children are inconvenient, so I'm just not going to have this. No, that's not what that is. Most fetal abnormalities don't come up until 20 weeks or more. Most people who are going to have an elective abortion, nearly 100% of people who are going to have a truly elective, I just didn't feel like getting pregnant abortion, or have it very, very early in the pregnancy. Almost all of the abortions that occur after 16 or 20 weeks are medical. And here's what that means. It means that either the mom or the baby, who by that point in time is almost always a wanted child, one of them may not survive, or if one of them doesn't survive, there may be some severe quality of life issues. So when we put in place those late-term abortion restrictions, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we know you might be a grieving parent. And I mean, yeah, if your baby doesn't have a brain and it'll be pretty sad, but you just hold tight. It'll be fine. That's not okay. I mean, we are taking grieving parents that are trying to figure out if mom can live or baby can live, or if the baby's going to have any quality of life, or if they continue the pregnancy to birth, is their baby never going to know anything but a few hours of sheer pain that they don't have any person they have the ability to communicate with enough to ask for help. I mean, that is a horrible, horrible position to be in. And then when you add layers that were put there by people in DC who want to judge you and shift that decision making to insurance providers and to attorneys, both of whom, those two groups, they're going to be looking for the thing least likely to get them sued, generally by the government. So you are going to end up, especially because of the disproportionate power, just causing immense harm. So no one should ever be against late-term abortion, because late-term abortions are medical procedures that are there to provide humanitarian ends to extremely, excruciatingly, physically and emotionally painful moments. I hope that answered your question, Arthur. I don't think it's any of the government's business. I think it's astonishing how we've been snowed over the last few decades to talk about it like it's something that people take lightly and it's not a serious decision, or that it's anybody else's decision but the person who has to live with it. So Max told us that News Center Maine will have a recording of the debate up by tomorrow, which is the same information that I'd had. If I already answered this, do I support closing the USA-Mexico border? Mexico is one of our largest trading partners. No, we have a phenomenal amount of commerce between the two. And we also have a lot of recreational travel. We have people who visit family on both sides of the border. No, I don't think so. Passport visa, work visa, like the Canadian border entry only. I think that's not the right way to ask the question. So if you're talking about, how people are allowed over the border, any country, or at least any developed country, we have a moral obligation that we have to provide asylum. Asylum is there. It is centuries old. It is a moral obligation in pretty much every religion and philosophical organization that we have as humans. And there are a lot of people that are twisting that into illegal immigration. Illegal immigration, what we really need to do is we really need to change our immigration laws. So I think that we need to have it so people can be a little bit more free-flowing, presuming that they don't have any violent criminal tendencies. And when I say free-flowing, I don't mean that people can just come over willy-nilly. I think that instead of having incentives to cross the border in spaces where it isn't monitored, that we need to let people be able to go through border checkpoints. And right now, we don't have visas for most countries, certainly not our adjoining countries. So I think that you should be able to travel a lot more freely. A lot of Americans would go down to Mexico for vacation, and vice versa. Folks should be able to come up here to work in either country. You already have to have a visa, or you're doing it without it being legal. You have to have a special work visa. And, you already, for airplanes, do need a passport. There are some exemptions, particularly when you get to border towns. We were talking about the northernmost resident that we have right now to check his mail. He actually has to go into Canada, back into the US, get the mail, go back in through Canada and back through the US. So we have a lot of towns like that on both our northern and southern border. And I don't think that we need to make that needlessly cumbersome. What we need to do is we need to say, hey, if you'd like to stay here for anything longer than a pretty short period of time that you would have as, somebody vacationing or just visiting for the weekend, here's the process that you go through. And it's, do you want to be here for school? Do you want to be here for an extended period? Are you looking to move here permanently? And we need to streamline that process so that anybody who wants to come here, that would have a reasonable eligibility to come here, that would be able to contribute and support here, they should have the ability to fill that paperwork out and be able to participate in a legal way. And then we wouldn't have those border issues. We do currently have those border issues. They're driven by decades of neglect of legislators just not wanting to handle an unpopular or a hot topic. That's not the only unpopular or hot topic they failed on, right? They've failed on immigration. They've failed on climate change. They've failed on healthcare. They've failed on human rights. They've failed on making wise and judicious purchasing decisions. Our Congress is not doing great. But we do need to reconfigure the entire system. Until we have the system reconfigured, both Bruce and Jared are big fans of walls. We already have walls pretty much anywhere they're practical. And if you've paid attention to any of the building of walls, they keep putting them places where like rivers go through them and they fall over and they're not well built. It's not a good way to control a border with that kind of physical barrier in most spaces. We should be using technology when it's necessary. It's less expensive, it's easier to upgrade, and it's more effective, frankly. Says travel to Mexico requires a passport. Travel to Canada requires a passport. I honestly haven't gone over to Canada since, oh gosh, I don't know. The last time we went to Canada was 2019. Our children only needed their birth certificates, so they didn't have a passport. I haven't looked recently to see if it was necessary because I haven't traveled to Canada with the pandemic. We haven't really gone anywhere. I do know that it requires for air travel, you have to have a passport. I'm not certain. I would have to look it up to see if it requires a passport to go through a car. But the last time we traveled, it absolutely did not need a passport to go through the car. Our children were able to travel without passports. So, you know, we've got controlled entry points only, close to unrestricted access. You know, I mean. Sure, there are certainly consequences, but as somebody who's lived not all that far from the Canadian border multiple times, people cross over the border all the time, and it only becomes a problem when people want to stay someplace for an extended period when it's not acceptable or if they're engaging in illegal activity. So Elizabeth says, I recently learned that until 1965, there was no cap on migrant workers on the border. They worked the season and returned to Mexico. Problems began when the law was changed to cap it. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of folks that are looking at our immigration system that don't realize until really quite recently, it was very easy to come in and out of the United States and work and go back home. And a lot of people do want to return home. They don't necessarily want to stay here, or the folks that did want to stay here had a fairly easy process to become a citizen. And it's only been in recent decades when we've been really like truly othering people in super inappropriate ways that we've looked at immigration and said, oh my gosh, no one can come here. We have a birth rate that can't sustain us indefinitely without immigration. That's how the United States has sort of survived our lower birth rates better and longer than a lot of competitors in the global marketplace. And I think that it's foolish to not be aware that that's how our country has sort of developed over the years, and that fluidity has been very helpful. Obviously, we want to make sure that when people are here and they're participating, they're doing so legally, they're contributing to systems that if they're going to use, they've, you know, contributed to the taxes. We want to make sure that people aren't coming here who are inordinately violent or harmful to society. We certainly have enough of those that are homegrown, but we need to reform our immigration system. So anybody who wants to come here legally and that should have a reasonable shot at doing so. And we don't have that now. And that is why you see that border pressure. But it's easier to blame the immigrants who just want a chance at a better life than look at our legislators and say, hey, you goons, why aren't you doing your job in fixing the immigration code? And it's going to be obnoxious to do, and there's going to be a lot of fighting, but it has to get done. You know, like, I don't always want to clean up my garbage disposal, but that doesn't mean that I don't have to do it. So, let's see, what else do we have? I hope that answered your question. And you'll find that it's okay to not agree on every single thing. I think it helps to have valid points and counterpoints to every point of view. It is not an invalid perspective to say that you want smaller immigration. It's not an invalid perspective to say that you want more generous immigration. Um, I think that those points help each other figure out how to do how to work through the problem in a manageable way so that you maybe have an immigration system that works a little bit more comprehensively, and the flaws that we keep getting caught up on actually get resolved. So I've got Arthur saying watch the trolls. I don't necessarily think it's a troll thing to want to be um nativist and protectionist. I think that there are a lot of things that if you don't work through the problems can be scary, but that's incentive to work through the problems, not incentive to not address the problems. So Michael says, how do you feel about the Republican-led charge to get rid of Social Security and Medicare? I mean, it's bullshit. It's complete and utter bullshit. I've paid into it my entire life. It better be there when I need it. And the only reason we're having these conversations is both political parties have had their money, their hand in the cookie jar for an awful long time, borrowing from those funds. So we need to get their hand out of the cookie jar. We need to be looking at our social support network and making sure that it's stable and there for us, because people have relied on that their entire lives. And you can't just say, whoopsie doodle, we spent the money on something else. So I think it's bullshit. But I also think that both political parties tend to dip a little bit in that, some more than others. So I think the parties are objectively different. They have objectively different flaws, but they do share some traits in common, right? It's not just one party that has folks that trade stock inappropriately. There might be more in one party, but there's members in both. There might be uh, one party that is spending more irresponsibly, but neither party looks at return on investment in a meaningful way. And this is something I talk about all the time. Neither party looks at how we spend our money and says, are we actually getting bang for buck with what we're doing? We tend to cut in social services because it seems like low-hanging fruit, but those social services actually circulate our money more and make our economy more vibrant and create more tax dollars for us. So we shouldn't be as short-sighted as that, because we need to be looking at not just short-term, but long-term spending and return on investment overall. Border concerns about drug traffic and human trafficking, than people looking for a better life. Yeah, I agree. Those are real concerns. And those concerns get better when we fix the underlying immigration code. The icky people slide through, but the people who aren't icky, right? I mean, drug traffickers slide through with folks who are just looking for a better life. And so if we took away most of the incentives to do that, all that would be left is the drug traffickers, and they'd be a hell of a lot easier to catch because they'd be the only ones out there in the desert. So, and we actually do catch a lot of that at the borders. It's not just them out in the desert. Um, there are illicit drugs that come in from every point of entry, even ones that aren't anticipated. And I think that probably needs to speak to larger drug controls too. I mean, I think you take away a lot of power when you decriminalize things. So there is no reason that marijuana should be criminal on a federal level at this point in time. It's absolutely nonsensical that it hasn't been fully scheduled yet. So, that right there would take away an awful lot of commerce that goes across the border illicitly. I worry about drugs too. My father, before he killed himself, was a very severe addict. And it changed who he was as a person, and it was awful. He became a really unpleasant person because of drugs, and that's something that personally impacts me. So I very much worry about that. But I think that we have been so foolish in our immigration policy that we end up catching and punishing the wrong people. We shouldn't be catching and punishing people looking for a better life. We should say, hey, you know what? You got in this really weird, crummy immigration situation, and it sucks that you didn't do the paperwork right. Let's find a way to get your paperwork right. And it might take a bit longer than if you did it right the first time, because, we don't want to necessarily incentivize doing it wrong all the time. But here's a way to get your paperwork right, so that we can get all of the people that are doing an honest, hardworking life out of the shadows, being able to have functional lives, be able to be full and participatory members of our communities. And then we only are left to take care of the people who are doing the illegal activity. I mean, that makes, when you get the people who aren't doing anything icky and harmful out of the way, it makes it much more clear how to get to the people that are. And I think that's something that gets lost in a lot of these conversations we have around immigration, criminalization, what and how we choose to criminalize, how we choose to pursue people that are engaged in activities that are objectively harmful to society. So I understand that coming towards somebody who has a more generous view of immigration can feel like you're trying to maybe look for that gotcha, but the bottom line is that it's not inappropriate to worry about those things. It just means that instead of saying let's not do it, it's an extra thing to look at. It's an extra layer to make sure that you're working through when you fix the policy. So I think we all should be concerned about human trafficking, and especially when it's done as a political stunt. But also just generally, I mean, we have human trafficking globally. We still have tons of slavery on the planet today in 2022. These are issues that as a society we haven't conquered yet, and we should. So any other questions, comments, concerns? Some people have come, some people have gone. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to get their questions answered. I do these twice a week. So if you didn't feel like speaking up today, if you feel like you got shortchanged on your answer, I'll be here Saturday at 8 a.m. It's a little early. You might catch me in my PJs. Hope you don't mind. I just kind of come to you however I am. I'm a big fan of authenticity. I don't like having people pretending to be somebody else to sell me to buy them on who they think I want instead of who they are. So when you get me warts and all. If you follow me on social media, you'll see that, I'll tell you, I had to take spackle off my face when we're talking. My dog, who is now snoring, but the microphone appears to not be picking it up, right next to me. You just get me. And sometimes that's not a perfect version of me. And I don't think I'm ever a perfect version of me, but I think that's what you should look for when you have people doing these jobs. That's why I let a little bit more personality through my social media. I don't have it as carefully managed as some other candidates, because like me or not, at least I'm consistent and you know what to expect. So I haven't seen any other questions. Oh, here's another one. How many questions am I asking? If you want to ask another question, that's fine. I'm happy to answer whatever. I have all the time this evening for you that you could possibly want. I will probably get tired of this after you do. And my husband might get tired of it before both of us do. So if you have another question, feel free to type it in. If there's anybody else who has questions, I'm happy to answer them. I've had a few messages come across. Oh, so I just got Ukraine question mark as a question. Ukraine's hard. And it's not hard because I don't know how I feel about things like genocide and war generally. Generally, I don't like war, and I like genocide less. And sometimes, unfortunately, they're tied together. What's hard for me about situations like Ukraine is I have got to presume that our members of Congress have access to classified information that I don't have access to. And it is very difficult for me to judge their actions on those specific things without knowing all of the classified information, because they may have information that catastrophically changes my view. I can tell you my gut instinct on Ukraine is I'm never a big fan of countries invading other countries. There seems to have been some fairly massive human rights violations that have occurred. There seems to have been some pretty severe genocide issues going on. And that doesn't mean that what got them there wasn't sticky. It doesn't mean that there weren't stress points and conflicts all around, though they may not have been equally distributed or equally valid or ethical. I think conflicts very seldom arise when it's one person who or one group that has done it all, and they are the only folks at fault. But I don't think that it's appropriate to invade other countries pretty much ever. So I don't think it was necessarily great when we did it in our past. It's pretty hard to unwind that. I don't like the idea of us doing it generally in the future. There are some reasons that you would do it. I hope that, those were battles that my father, my grandfather, and my uncle were all in the Navy. And, I hope that we don't have to send many more of our children to serve in wars like that, but they're always possible. So I know that's not a particularly gratifying answer, and that's because I feel like I don't have the information to tell you the answer on it. I certainly hope that our elected officials are less ridiculous in consideration of war than they are in their marketing to get elected. And I certainly hope they put more patriotism, compassion, and humanity into those decisions than is in any way apparent from a whole bunch of their marketing, which is probably not the greatest. Comments on crime and law enforcement. I actually have talked through this with quite a few folks I know in the district who are sheriffs and police. I also kind of lean on my work doing some criminal defense and domestic violence. I think that we have gotten wrapped up in a lot of slogans that really don't do the problems their justice. I think that overall, our police are undertrained. I think they are tasked with things that are far beyond the scope of their training and their job description. And I think that the defund police movement comes from that. Like, hey, they might not be the best folks to be doing it. I don't think the slogan's a great slogan. I think it's a not great slogan. I also don't think the whole back the police no matter what is appropriate, because every profession has goobers. I mean, lawyers in Maine have Seth Carey, which is very funny if you know locally, and also a little sad, but we've all got people in our profession that aren't terrific. I think that we ask police to do substantially more in their job than is fair, right, or appropriate. I think that it's very easy to cut and underfund social services that would take a lot of the pressure off of them and get us far better outcomes. It would be much less stressful for police and much less stressful for community to have a range of services that can be called instead of dumping every single thing on the police. I think it creates a very unhealthy emotional dynamic for our police. I think they end up probably in a state of constant PTSD and overreaction. And it makes it very difficult for them to do the jobs that they're supposed to do. So I think that what we need to be doing is properly funding our social services and asking police to be police, not police to be everything. And that doesn't seem to be what's happening from either party's perspective. And that is really unfortunate, because I think that's how you grow a healthier community, is by making sure you aren't asking police to also be social workers and divorce attorneys and personal counselors, and firemen and moose wranglers. And like, it's too much. It's too much to ask of any job completely. And though I was not endorsed by the police associations, I have had numerous sheriff ask me to please go out of my way to get elected so that we can be balancing that with mindful and thoughtful process. And I will say, though, generally I have seen police overreact far more than I've seen them underreact. I was out in Rangeley a few months ago, and the police out there were just phenomenal in handling a crisis situation that somebody who was really intoxicated was trying to take to a level that, it didn't ever really get out of hand, and nobody did get hurt. And, the 45 minutes to an hour worth of patience and resilience was really refreshing to see, because I think we don't get to see that a lot. But I think that's what you have happen a lot of times in communities where people are trying really hard to make sure those services are available. So I hope that answered your question. And again, I think a lot of times people come to these town halls and they are very conservative or very liberal, and they've got these mindsets that people have been jammed into, where they're expecting, like, folks who come at me from a conservative point of view, if they listen with an open heart, they'll find that it's not that I don't appreciate the conservative point of view. I do. I was actually raised in a Republican household. um I've been a political independent for decades, but I a lot of my family still is very conservative. There's some good points there, like kind of historical conservative views of wanting to be prepared and well thought out, and mindful in how you proceed, and not over red taping and over litigating. There is good stuff there. It's not present in the Republican Party at a federal level anymore, which is really disappointing, because we have a lot of people in Maine that are conservatives that aren't really attracted to the Democratic Party and know that the Republican Party is just really screwed up right now on a federal level, that are looking for someone to at least consider that when they move forward. I have folks that come at me from a very liberal perspective and expecting me to say, oh, I'm more conservative than that, and the liberal stuff is bad. The liberal stuff's good too. I mean, to push forward and challenge and say, what should we be looking at for human rights? What should we be looking at for pain points? Those are good questions to ask. They get us better policy. The biggest problem that we have is both of the parties are so caught up in the money that they've stopped doing the talking. Guns, I think you must have come in a little bit later. We talked about guns a little bit earlier. I don't care if you hunt. I don't care if you have self-defense. The property that we're building on is 45 minutes from the police getting there. If something goes wrong, we're going to have to be prepared. If there's, a break-in or a really surly moose, the moose is probably more likely where we're moving to. If you hunt people, we're going to have a problem. And we do need to have real red flag laws. My father, I'm certain, is dead because we didn't have good red flag laws in the 80s. And that was something that we should have had. We know that mental health and some weapons are a bad combination. Everybody knows that guy. Everybody, could be a gal, usually a guy. Not trying to be sexist, but just going off of statistics. Everybody's got that family member or friend or, cousin or neighbor who you just know shouldn't be around weapons, or maybe they shouldn't be around weapons because of something that's going on temporarily, or maybe they're fine with weapons, but they're not fine with weapons and alcohol. We all know those people that are just dangerous and not particularly cautious, and we have to stop letting irresponsible gun owners use responsible gun owners as a shield and say we can never have any regulation ever. But we do need to, with that regulation, make sure we're using a scalpel instead of a chainsaw. We do have to remember that there are responsible gun owners. So if you're a responsible gun owner, you have nothing to worry about from me. If you're an irresponsible gun owner, you probably have a lot to worry about from me, because I'm going to go out of my way to get the state and federal laws working together. I'm going to make sure that we have appropriate training. And I'm going to try and put things in place that say, if you want to shoot stuff in a way that doesn't hurt people, I don't care. But if you want to hurt people, we need to care a little bit more about that. So Susan asked, thank you for being me and caring for our country, state, district, and understanding. I do my best. I'm not perfect. The best thing any of you all left here today and any of you watching later can do, tell a few friends. When I ran in 2018, I got 5.7% of the vote, I think. So I got 16,552 votes. And if all the folks who voted for me brought 10 or 11 friends, I'd win. I'd win in the first round. I wouldn't need ranked choice voting. I would just win. We could have somebody in office who cares about this. And I can tell you, from the bottom of my heart, I'm not in this for the money. I'm not in this for the power. I'm certainly not photogenic enough to be in it for the attention. We have got to have laws that work, and it is making my day job hard. I love my day job. I love being a family law attorney, and I cannot do my job well because these laws are not written well, and we don't have anybody who knows how they work writing them. So I got to thank you. I want a conservative vote. Thank you for being open to the possibility that I could be the person you want in office. I hope one day, not that many years from now, everybody who runs for office is smarter than me and more thoughtful than me and kinder than me and makes me feel a little sheepish for doing the job. And it's really unfortunate to me right now that that's not where we are. I mean, I had somebody a couple weeks ago ask me why I thought I would be able to best 2 congressmen. And, they each have a degree. I have 4 degrees. 2 of them are graduate. I've run a business, several businesses at this point in time. I'm a mom. I care about my neighbors. I care about my community. And that's what we need there is we need people who really care about our community in office. And we just don't have that right now. So tell a few friends. I will be back at 8:00 on Saturday morning. Hopefully I'll have some caffeine in me. If you need anything else, you know how to find me. I'll also be here next Tuesday. Oh, might not be next Tuesday. There is one Tuesday coming up where I will be up in the county and driving. I may not be able to be on that, but I will put it on social media if that's the Tuesday. Sorry, I don't have my calendar in front of me because I am giving you my undivided attention. And if there's anything else you need, I look forward to working with you. I haven't seen any new questions come in. Again, I want to thank whether you're liberal, conservative, independent, kind of a mix. And honestly, a lot of us are kind of a mix. A lot of us aren't entirely liberal, aren't entirely conservative. And that's why you'll hear me say, I don't aim for left or right. I try to point my compass north because it is a mix that gets us to the best solutions. So thank you for being open to the possibility I could be your person. Thank you for joining me this evening. We've been here for a while. We've had a whole bunch of people come and go. We've talked tonight longer than the gentleman will ever debate me. They are refusing to show up at the other 2 debates. Put a little bit of pressure on media and get them to cover it better. So thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful night. I'm going to go ahead and check out since everybody's dwindling and I'm kind of fading too. I will see you in the coming weeks, and I hope you have a really, really lovely rest of your week.